Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and a very happy Easter to you. Easter continues. We're in the midst of the octave of Easter. We're at the very beginning edge of the season of Easter in the Catholic Church, and all that time we're celebrating a great historical fact, a great fact of history, that Jesus got up out of that tomb and walked away. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess he could. I'm not exactly sure how he. Maybe it was a chariot of heavenly horses. I'm not saying I know that. I'm saying he got up, he is risen, and that is our assurance of our own resurrection with him, to be with him in the house of the Father. So much to be happy about. We got a great show for you today. Second hour, Carlo's going to be here, and we're going to talk about the Bible blueprint for the papacy. So particularly if you're a person, if you're a fellow Catholic, perhaps, who says, nope, it ain't in there. It's not in the Bible, that papacy that you Catholics point to, well, yeah, that'd be a perfect hour for you to call and talk with Carlo. This hour, our good friend Liz Kelly is back with us. Elizabeth Kelly is the author of a whole bunch of books. I don't know how many, nine books, I think. Many of them award-winning. Jesus Approaches is among her books. Your Heart, His Home, Prayer Companion is one of them. She's a spiritual director, a retreat leader, a wonderful speaker, and a very fine author. And the new book is called Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. Elizabeth Kelly, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, a lot of your life, it seems to me, is about letting women know and have actual contact with the love that God has for them as individuals and as women. So what got you to write a book about women saints or holy women?
Well, it was interesting because when COVID hit, as for everybody, all of my work dried up in about 4 days.
Yeah.
And I suddenly had a lot of time on my hands, and I had been wanting to write a book about virtue and include in that stories from women in the church that would exemplify these virtues. And so I really started to launch as a result of the pandemic. But I think too, I wanted to take a peek at some of the virtues that we maybe don't discuss as much as virtue. For example, magnanimity. You may know the epilogue is on the combination of humility and magnanimity and how those two virtues work together. So there was a lot about wanting to invite people into a deeper look at some of the lesser known or lesser discussed virtues.
It's and in doing that, you also got in contact with and share the stories of some of the lesser known women of the Catholic faith.
That was really fun. That was probably one of the best parts of the whole book, is that as I was thinking about what virtues to include, these women just kind of found me. And many of them I had never heard of before I started working on this project. For example, Anne de Gagny, the child venerable, who exemplified obedience. We talk about that in her chapter. And so I was really trying to look at women that had not gotten a lot of coverage before. I wanted to learn about them, and it was just so much fun to be able to present them in this collection. So they're not exhaustive hagiographies, but just little glimpses of how each of these women exemplified one particular virtue.
We're actually taking our topic from the title of the book this hour, Love Like a Saint. If you have questions about how to love like a saint, Elizabeth Kelly, the author, is our guest. 888-318-7884 is our number, 888-318-7884. So one of the things I note, you do warn us against trying to imitate saints in the particular, in the details of what they did. Like, my life is not supposed to, in its details, look like, say, Catherine of Siena's life, for which I am grateful, frankly, knowing some of the things that she did in the name of love.
Right.
Some of which I maybe better not to mention. But what's that about? What's the conception then of the idea of being holy in the way that these women are holy, but not necessarily imitating the details of their life?
There's some great insights from the saints themselves and obviously from the theologians, but that each of us is de Caussade has this great quote. He says, "The life of each saint is the life of Jesus Christ. It is a new gospel." And so we can think about it as every one of us has a way that we are carrying forward the gospel that's particular to us, to our circumstances, to the crosses that we've been given, to the graces that we have, and all of that. And I think it's really important not to compare yourself too much too directly to the lives of the saints. In some cases, there might be a really direct correlation. For example, I was out speaking on Benedetta Bianchi-Porro the other day, and I met two young women who suffer from the same disease and, like Benedetta, want to become doctors. I mean, so there are some remarkable times that saints sort of pierce through our reality so that they can help to show us the way. And there are other times when they just want to companion us in our own walk. And comparison is never a good idea, just generally speaking. It's there's a kind of errant posture when we start comparing ourselves to other people anyway. But I'd rather invite people to think about walking with the saints, shoulder to shoulder.
888-318-7884, our number. Elizabeth Kelly, the author of the brand new book, Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. It's from the Word Among Us Press. 888-318-7884. If you have questions about loving like a saint, this is the hour for you. Not all of these women, however, are canonized saints.
Correct.
What's the idea there?
Sure. I wanted to choose women with broad experience. So we have everyone from Eve La Valliere, who it's very unlikely a cause will be opened for her anytime soon, just a regular woman who experienced this extraordinary conversion, to a number of saints who have already been either have achieved sainthood, and all along the way. Growth in virtue is a process. It's one step and then another step and then another step. And I was hoping that by choosing women from such a broad expression of holiness and having achieved holiness, that you would see your own path in this. You'd see your own story in this, and how we don't all start at saints. I mean, there are some people who are born with extraordinary graces, but there are others of us, like Eve La Valliere, who was born into an extraordinary trauma and poverty. And if conversion is available even for her after the debauched life that she led, then it's also available for us, and that we don't need to be afraid of where we're starting from. God will meet us wherever it is that we're starting from. Wherever you are right now with the virtues and practicing a life of holiness, it's not too late for you, and you are included in this, and your life is an invitation to be that new gospel that Caussade discusses.
Liz Kelly, our guest, 888-318-7884. You talk about being afraid. There's the one side of the call to a saintly life, and you are calling us to a saintly life. You are calling us to live as saints, full of love as the saints were. So the one fear, look, I'm a wretched, miserable sinner. And I that's just not, I'm not worthy of that. That's not me. I'll hope to squeak by. But the other fear is, what's God going to do with me if he gets his hands on me? And some of that comes through in the book too, this sense of not being afraid of what God's going to do with you once he gets his hands on you.
I think that's a legitimate fear. I think it's, was it Saint Teresa who said, if this is how you treat your friends, I would hate to see how you treat your enemies,
right.
After all that she had suffered. So, I think that there's a reasonable sense of hesitation sometimes, because the price of virtue, the demands that love places on us, are very great. But that's why they're also worthy, because they are great. And we've all been created with an innate kind of magnanimity, that is to understand it as the capacity to understand what is great, and then the desire to choose that, to work toward what is great, to become worthy of what is great. And I think, if anything, our culture is bent on telling us that we're not worthy of greatness, or that we were not created for greatness. We've been kind of robbed of that existential faith in the fact that my existence is a good. My existence is a good, and I am placed here in this life to achieve good things, to help build up the kingdom. More than anything else, I think that's probably one of the primary lies that people struggle with, is that they have no really important part to play, when in fact everybody has a really important part to play.
Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. Elizabeth Kelly is the author, and she is our guest this hour. Your calls are welcome. 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884. Before we go off to this first break, I'll remind you, spring sale continues over at shop.catholic.com. This is a pretty good sale. I mean, I usually say rush and hurry, but what is this, a month we're going on now of this sale? So who knows how much longer it will be? I don't know, but you get 10 to 25% off everything at shop.catholic.com. Some of the stuff's more than 25% off. Shop.catholic.com, spring sale right now.
Call us now with your question. Hello? On Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
The EWTN home video highlight for April is Hope to Die with Dr. Scott Hahn and Rob Corzine. Dr. Scott Hahn and Rob Corzine explore Catholic teaching on death and the resurrection of the body, helping us to look forward with hope to eternal life with God. Order your DVD set at EWTNRC.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or call 1-800-854-6316.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and I want to just keep saying it. Happy Easter to you, especially to those. I don't know if I want to say especially. Happy Easter to everybody, but we do have a special fondness in our hearts and a joy for those who were welcomed into the church in recent days. First week as a Catholic, maybe just received sacraments for the first time, and we're happy you're here, and we'd love to take your call. And if you're like, my call's not quite, Liz would like to talk with you. I'd like to talk with you. If you're new to the Catholic Church and you've got maybe a question about how to live like a saint now that you're here, that's the title of the book. That's the title of this hour with Elizabeth Kelly. Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. The number, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about Yves Lavalliere, who you write about in the book. It's striking that such a modern person, I guess. And is that part of what you were trying to do? That, hey, look, this sanctity thing, it's not a medieval thing. This holiness thing is not like that died out in the Middle Ages. This is something for you now.
Yeah, I think that's partly why Eve's story is so compelling. If you don't know anything of her story, she was born in the, when was she born? She was born in the 1860s, I think. No, 1870s. I'm sorry, I'm so bad about numbers like that. In any case, she lived around the turn of the century, and in about right at about the turn of the century, she was an actress. She became very, very famous in France. She was very highly regarded. Sarah Bernhardt and other famous actresses just championed her and thought that she was an absolute genius. And she had been raised by a father who was a costumier. He was also very abusive alcoholic. And when Eve was just 17, she observed in front of her and her brother, their father shot and killed their mother. He turned the gun on Eve, missed her, and then turned the gun on himself. So she came out of just extraordinary trauma. She was placed in an orphanage from which she ran away. And she found herself on the stage in Paris, had extraordinary success, a house on the Champs-Élysées and one in the country, and all of the clothes and the glamour. She met kings and queens from around the world. I mean, she just had this extraordinary success in wealth, in fame. And she would remark, though, that she would be visited by a loneliness and a sadness she could not quite explain. By about World War I was in full swing, and she was supposed to go tour the U.S. for a year or something. And she knew before she went there that she really needed a rest. So she moved out to the countryside in France. And she just happened to rent a little chateau that just happened to be under the care of the local parish priest. How or why this is, I'm not exactly sure. The first Sunday she is there, she's resting. The priest comes for a visit, and he says, "Well, I noticed you weren't in Mass this morning." Very gentle, good man. And she said, "Well, Father, I just assumed you wouldn't want me there, knowing who I was, that I'm this actress." And her life was filled with, drug addiction and affairs and, all sorts of drama.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, you're one of my flock. Of course you should come." And every week after that, she was there. Within a matter of months, she and the woman she had been traveling with her, she had a maid who traveled with her, were receiving catechesis and visiting every day. Eve became distressed, thinking about her life, and if the incarnation was true, what would that mean for her? And so the priest, in just an incredibly priestly, fatherly, pastorally caring way, gave her Lacordaire's biography of Mary Magdalene. It had been written about 20 years earlier, and he said, "Read this, read it prayerfully, read it on your knees, and then we'll talk about it." She did that. Copious tears fell, and when she got up, she was a new woman. Within weeks, she received confession and the first communion she had received since she was a child. And from that day, from the day she received the Blessed Sacrament as an adult, following this conversion, she marked that as her birthday for the rest of her life. She left the entrapments of fame and fortune, the wealth, the houses. She gave everything away, gave up the makeup. There were all kinds of rumors flying, as you imagine there would be in a Hollywood type setting, like, oh, she had a beauty treatment, it went wrong, and now she's hideous, or there were other rumors that she was a spy in a German jail. But her conversion was so deep and so compelling. She spent the rest of her life as a penitent and doing service for the poor. Very, very, very moving story.
It's an extraordinary story too, because I did not know until you exposed me to her about Eve Lavalliere at all. At least if I don't have no recollection of being introduced to her, but it's a very modern story in that. Really, and what this is increasing as our society is kind of shattering in many ways, at the root, there's horrible trauma, and people have that. And there, many modern people have a horrible kind of trauma. And then a life of kind of acting out of that being the impetus for a life that's, well, less than virtuous, I suppose. And then piling all of that on, this sense of unworthiness then, that I'm not loved and I'm not worthy, and here this comes shining into her life. That's really what we would like to happen to every modern person, is this thing comes shining into your life, this Jesus.
Yeah, and she writes about that. We're fortunate because we have a lot of her correspondence back and forth to friends and who are concerned, why are you leaving this your life of success? And she would write about how she felt the love of Christ. It was visceral to her. She knew that she was loved. Even with all the debauchery, all the terrible choices that she made, it was none of that filled her. It was this encounter that Magdalene has with Christ at the tomb, which became her story, and this is how it works. We're invited to make the gospel story our story. And it was Magdalene who showed her the way into that encounter. I think that's partly why I wanted to include stories of real women in the book, because they're so convincing.
And I think will be really helpful. I feel like I wish I had this book to put in the hands of either of my daughters at a certain point, because
nice.
We need this. We need someone to look to who we can identify with and who shows us the way. And I really do feel it's a loss that many young Catholic girls are raised, they go to Catholic school, they never see a woman religious. Not by any fault of anyone's, it's just not there in the way that they were. So to meet people like Eve, this can be life transforming.
And she's just one of the stories in there. I think too about Anne de Gagny, the child, and the way that she exhibited obedience. And obedience has so fallen out of fashion. We need to be revolutionaries. We need to be insurrectionists. We need to be speaking truth to power. And I mean, I'm not saying that all of that is bad, but it misconstrues or misunderstands obedience as a virtue that is really based on love. And Anne's story of obedience is so moving and so delightful and so compelling, because she wasn't being obedient to a principle or a power or a government or a rule. She was being obedient out of love, because she had fallen in love with the Lord, and she wanted to offer this obedience as a gift to him, not because she feared the repercussions of disobedience. Huge, important distinction to make. And we open the book with that because it's really the root of all the virtues. We want to practice the virtues because we are in love, not because we fear the repercussions of not leading a virtuous life.
Yeah, beautifully said. Love like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. Elizabeth Kelly is the author, and she is our guest. Your calls are welcome. 888-318-7884. I would like to introduce or allow you to introduce some more of the women in the book, but I would like to get to callers as well. So shall we take some calls and then we'll meet some more of the women in the book? Again, the book is called Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. 888-318-7884 is our number. We go to New York. Spencer watching on YouTube Live. You are first up today, Spencer. Go ahead with your question for Liz Kelly.
Hi, I'm thankful to be here. Catholic Answers has helped me a lot with my faith.
Praise God.
But yeah, I had a question on scrupulosity. I recently was baptized and confirmed and received Holy Communion on Easter Vigil. I'm very thankful and very grateful. And
welcome.
It's probably the best moment of my life. So I have scrupulosity, and I'm always fearful of offending God. I'm always fearful of sinning against God. And I know that, saints such as St. Alphonsus went through that. And, as someone who's going through a lot of anxiety because of that, and in many cases, actually, my mind telling me this is a sin, or this isn't a sin, or in many cases, my actions being in my mind saying that they are sins when they're not, or they're mortal when they're venial, causes a lot of anxiety. And, St. Alphonsus, since you went through that, I'm sure that maybe you'd be able to help kind of give me some feedback.
Well, especially if maybe some
guidance to help me.
Yeah, maybe is there anybody in the book that went through that?
I think it was a temptation for some. I don't address that specifically in the book. I wish I had, now that you bring up the question. But of course, the first thing that occurs to me is when scrupulosity begins to rear its ugly head and you're getting into thinking and wondering, is this a sin? Is it not a sin? Maybe the best possible thing you can do is, rather than asking how not to offend God, turn to him and say, how shall I love you today? How are you calling me to love you today? That's automatically going to put you in a much healthier frame of mind, because you're not even thinking of concentrating on the sin, you're concentrating on loving well. Completely different viewpoint.
Elizabeth Kelly's our guest. I'm sorry we have to head to a quick break, Spencer. Excuse me for that. Love Like a Saint is the book, 888-318-7884. Most of us Catholic parents agree our number one goal in life is to pass on the faith to our children. But here's the bad news. Today's world has a million ways to steal your kid's soul. Don't be afraid, says Father Sebastian Walsh. God loves your children even more than you do, and he desires their salvation more than anything. In his groundbreaking new book, Always a Catholic, Father Walsh shows you how to cooperate with God to bring about the fulfillment of his will for your kids. Always a Catholic reminds us that keeping our kids in the faith is about the way we live our Catholicism in our own lives and as a family from day to day. Order your copy of Always a Catholic by visiting shop.catholic.com today, or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Have you enrolled in the Catholic Answers School of Apologetics? Let me ask you a more important question. Do you believe as a Catholic that you have an obligation to share the Catholic faith? In fact, the Church has answered this question, and the answer is that all confirmed Catholics are obliged to share the faith. It's actually in canon law. Catholic Answers is here to help you fulfill that obligation. Our School of Apologetics courses will equip you to help all the people you come in contact with understand what the Church teaches and why. A great place to start is with all the Catholics in your life. Learn the art of apologetics from the best of the best and start sharing the gospel today. Visit schoolofapologetics.com. That's schoolofapologetics.com.
How we got our names can be fascinating to discuss.
We'll do just that tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now more of Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. As always, having a great time talking with Elizabeth Kelly. She produces very, very fine books, and you can find them wherever good Catholic books are sold. You can probably find them where bad Catholic books are sold, as long as they slip a few good ones in there. Jesus Approaches among them, Your Heart, His Home, A Prayer Companion, and many others. Love Like a Saint is the new book. It has an absolutely stunning picture on the cover that I had never seen before of the Visitation. A striking picture. Congratulations on that, by the way. I don't know if you found it or somebody else
Thank
found
you.
it, but that's a beautiful cover.
No, the publisher found it, but yeah, it's a gorgeous one. Yeah.
And it's very, how shall I say this? I sometimes feel like there can be, in our hyper kind of feminist vigilance of the modern times, a loss of appreciation for the absolute magnificently beautiful feminine side of Christianity, of the whole Judeo-Christian tradition, and it is not lost in this painting, in this beautiful painting of the Visitation. The feminine is celebrated and loved and beloved in the Catholic faith, in the Christian tradition, by Jesus himself. Isn't that the case?
Well, and it's also just an extraordinary strength within the church.
Yeah.
We tend to downplay it as though it were a weakness that needed to be medicated out of us. And it's the exact opposite. It is a great, tremendous strength that needs to be cultivated just as surely as masculinity or any other gift that we've been given. We need to cultivate it, steward it properly, and give it back in service to the world.
And learn from these women like Elizabeth and Mary, and you mentioned Mary Magdalene, but this does not with the close of the age of revelation, the close of feminine genius among saints, that never has come. They're still up to today. The church is producing these magnificent women, many of whom you've located and told us about and drawn lessons from in your book, Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. By the way, I would love to take your calls, 888-318-7884, our number, 888-318-7884. I think many people will just want to hear about these magnificent women. One of the things you said, and this will be related to, I want to ask you about Josephine Bakhita. One of the things you said before the break really struck me, that the world wants to convince us that the way forward is this insurrectionist and revolutionary way, and we all have to be somehow involved in this. And that's actually not the Christian vocation. The Christian vocation is to love, and to love like a saint. And they're quite distinct. They're two separate ways, and they're not alike. Why do you think the way of love is the more worthy way? Why do you pick that?
Well, I think, I'm here in Minnesota, which was ground zero for the recent riots around the death of George Floyd and other things. And I can remember observing some of this, and I was trying to recall, was there a moment when Jesus was ever violent? And what would that be, and what would that mean? And of course, we have the episode of him turning over the tables in the temple, where you could argue that he was destroying property. Of course, he doesn't hurt a human being,
right.
But he drives out this corrosive poison. And what's the very next thing he does? They start bringing him people, and he heals them. And so this becomes a microcosm. I want to drive out of myself whatever corrosive sin is in there to create space for healing. That has to be the model for us as a culture. Yes, we want to get rid of any poison that is tainting or stripping away the dignity that the temple required, because it was God's house. It was holy, and they were damaging that. And so I want to become God's temple. I want to make a holy space for him, and then invite others into that so that they can be healed. And there isn't anything about insurrection in that. There wasn't anything about revolution in the pejorative sense of the word. It was all about reclaiming holiness, reclaiming sanctity, and then inviting others into that holy, safe, sanctified place so that Jesus could heal them. That's it. That's it.
888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. It's amazing the people who fall in love with Jesus and then want to be part of that healing that accompanies Jesus. When you think about how horribly they suffered in their life, and certainly Josephine Bakhita is one of the most shocking, horrible stories of abuse, But it's also this unbelievable story of love because of the choices that she made. Will you tell us about Josephine Bakhita?
Sure. She was stolen as a child by Arab slave traders. It was very common, still is common, in fact, today in that part of Africa. She was sold into slavery, and not just slavery, it was an extraordinary daily beatings, abuses, physical abuses of just excruciating proportions. She received tattooing, which is just so horrifying. You can read about it in the book or anything on Josephine, but just horrible suffering through. She was stolen at about 8. She wasn't quite sure how old she was when she was taken. Never saw her family again. Never saw anyone from her village again. Through the years, she eventually was made her way to Italy. She was sold and then sold and then sold a third time. And the gentleman who purchased her as a slave in Italy, she was eventually in a position to, in Italy, slavery was illegal. And when the family that owned her, thought of her as a slave, wanted to take her back to Africa, she had this extraordinary connection and was beginning a conversion and catechesis in the church. And at that point, she said, no, I can't go back to Africa. I want to stay here. I want to become Catholic. And she did. Now, we can't underestimate the amount of courage it took for her to say no to this white family who, all intents and purposes, was good to her. They weren't beating her. It was certainly a step up from what she had experienced before. They had made her basically the governess to their young daughter. They trusted her completely. The daughter loved her. She loved the daughter. It was a very genuinely affectionate relationship. But they wanted her to go back to Africa, and she absolutely refused. She was not going to do it. It became such a huge event that even the highest courts in the land were consulted in Italy at the time, and her owners were told slavery is illegal in Italy, and she has the right to stay here if she wants. She does stay. She becomes Catholic. Eventually, she discerns a call to religious life, and she spends the rest of her life as a religious in Italy, doing missions and working very simple jobs. She was the porter at the convent for many years. She had other similar, very simple jobs. Now, one of the extraordinary pieces in her story is, even as a child, she would look at the world around her, the stars in the sky, and think, this is so beautiful, this is so vast, and I want to know who made them. She had this desire to know the maker, the creator. And not only that, but she recognized that there was something great that had created and made all that was beautiful. Even in her captivity, she would be visited by these notions of seeing the beauty of the earth and knowing that someone had created them and created them out of love and for her, that she should delight in him, in his creation. So she was born with just an extraordinary kind of faith. There was sort of an infused faith that was natural to her, and then on encountering Christ in the cross, and in particular the Byzantine Madonna that she would see daily in Italy was a black Madonna with a black child. And as these things began to speak to her, she suddenly was able to fill out the picture of this longing that she had had for her entire life. It was kind of like the meat came on the bones all of a sudden, and so it was very quick for her to fall in love with Christ. It wasn't difficult for her. There was already this groundwork, and even through all this terrible abuse, kidnapped as a child. You can't imagine anything worse. She would reflect often later in life that she believed God was with her at every moment, even in those terrible moments, that he never abandoned her and that he was always looking out for her. Just extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and Josephine Bakhita is Saint Josephine Bakhita now, so she did live and love like a saint. The title of Elizabeth Kelly's book is "Love Like a Saint: Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women." If for no other reason than to meet Josephine Bakhita, if you haven't met her, a great reason to get the book. But it's just full of extraordinary women. Here's the thing: Josephine Bakhita didn't cry out for justice for the rest of her life. She said very strange things like, I'm grateful for my suffering because it brought me to Jesus. I don't think most of us are capable of that.
She, not only that, she said that if she were to encounter her captors, she would thank them and forgive them. Because as a result of that, as you say, she found faith in God, and she wouldn't have traded that for anything. That's a tough mouthful to swallow.
It sure is, isn't it?
But reading about her, reading her letters, hearing from her own voice, because she told one of the sisters who wrote down her story, you don't doubt for a minute that she absolutely means it.
Yep.
She absolutely means it. That forgiveness, that reality that if I had not gone through all of this, I would not be where I am now. It wasn't something she just made up or conjured so that she could get through the day.
That was her lived experience.
Earnest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And to the degree that that's not ours, Elizabeth, I would say we just don't know Christ like she did. That she put such a high value on knowing him that anything was worth it.
And I think that's one of the reasons that her story is so compelling, because every life has its injustices. Every life does. I don't know anybody who hasn't ever suffered an injustice at some point or another. And most of us are not going to suffer the injustices to the degree that she did, being literally robbed from her own life.
Yeah.
And not even knowing her African name. She never even knew her own name. But just spending time with her, and I hope that the book feels like that. A number of people who have read it have said it feels like these women just come in and sit down in my living room and tell me their story. In befriending her in that way, I think I'm so convinced of her.
Yeah.
I'm so convinced that it's so true. That I just want to spend more time with her and ask for that grace to be visited on me if, injustices come my direction. But, she had extraordinary courage too. And I think that it takes a lot of courage not to hold the grudge, not to hold the resentment for the rest of your life. Look at what happened to me. And she had extraordinary courage to set that down. And she spent the rest of her life talking to people about it. She wasn't shy about talking about what happened to her. And when other people suffered similar things, she obviously had such deep compassion for them. It was just beyond words. But that allowed her then also to really embrace joy. I find it really compelling and interesting that her fellow sisters thought of her as very funny, and that she had even a silly streak.
Yeah.
She was very fond of telling this story of a little child who came up to her and said, "Did you eat too much chocolate?" And she said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, your skin is brown. It's like chocolate. Did you eat too much chocolate?" She was very fond of telling that story of how a little child wouldn't understand race or anything like that. And
her heart was lightened. Like you get the sense of her heart was lightened by her love of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Liz Kelly's our guest. Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women is the book. Our number is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Several times, Liz, throughout this, as you've described these holy women, you've talked about falling in love. When we come back from this break, I want to ask you about falling in love with the Lord. More on Catholic Answers Live with Elizabeth Kelly right after this.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization Online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
You know, you get paid in heaven for the ministry that you do on here. I love your show. My life has completely changed. Through God's power and through His revelation, I've changed my stuff in my life. All my first fruits go to God, and I remain in God. I pray all the time. Your show is in my prayer.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Hey, second hour, Carlo Broussard's going to be here, and we're going to do the Bible blueprint for the papacy. If that sticks in your craw, if you're a fellow Christian and that papacy thing just sticks in your craw and you don't see that anywhere in the Bible, you are the perfect caller. Call and chat with Carlo next hour, 888-318-7884. You're welcome to call this hour as well to talk with Elizabeth Kelly, the author of a brand new book called Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. It's available from The Word Among Us Press. Elizabeth Kelly, a prolific Catholic writer, speaker, retreat leader, and you should find out more about her. Tell me, first of all, I forgot the website, Liz K.
Oh. LizK.org.
LizK.org.
Shortest website on the planet.
I didn't forget, actually. I thought I forgot, but I didn't forget because that's what I was going to say. I want to ask you about this idea of falling in love. Loving like a saint involves falling in love. You just don't love like Josephine Bakhita did. You just don't give up a movie, a great acting career like Yves Lavalier did without something happening, and you describe it as falling in love. Can you say more about that?
Sure. I think especially in Eve's case, I don't know that she had ever had the experience of being loved just for who she was. She was adored. People admired her. She had many people who wanted to be near her because of this genius gift that she had. But that's not the same as being loved as a daughter, as a child of God. And it wasn't really until she encountered Magdalene's story that she was able to see herself in that same capacity. And I think, Magdalene's often portrayed as someone who has just fallen so crazy in love with the Lord that everybody else has gone away, but she is going to hang out at the tomb because she just can't stand the thought of not knowing where she is. She's just going to keep searching for him, keep looking for him. And in the end, he finds her as he did all the time, in the first place. And I think Eve had that same experience. She was kind of like out looking for something to fill that void. And what she discovered is that, love came to her instead and discovered her and loved her in a kind of complete way. I think there is an aspect in that of falling, of surrender. it's not even about, well, I'm going to choose to love. It's almost like you can't help yourself. You're just going to throw yourself into this river and allow yourself to be carried away by it because it's just so inviting.
This is such an important, it's just an important idea in that we forget that our fundamental thing is to introduce other people to Jesus. And why? Why introduce them to Jesus? Because he's wonderful. And to be loved by him and to love him is wonderful.
Yeah, right. No, I think that's definitely a theme with all of the women in the book. For sure.
A caller from Ypsilanti, Michigan, Lawrence, listening to EWTN Channel 130 on Sirius XM satellite radio. You are up next, Lawrence. Go ahead with your question for our guest, Elizabeth Kelly. Lawrence?
Hello.
Hi, Lawrence.
Yes, this is Father Deacon Lawrence. You're talking about St. Makita, which I just turned this on about 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
It's a lot of similarities in the love and the forgiveness as a Romanian Orthodox monk that I knew that passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember, he went through a lot of persecution in Romania.
Sure.
And, he said that he thinks he spent 11 years in prison, and his older sister was the abbess at the monastery. She said he was beaten up so much he doesn't know. He doesn't remember he was in there for 13 years. But there's an interview that I've seen where, the interview was asking him, how could you forgive these people? And he says, well, it's like Jesus on the cross. And I missed the time frame of what St. Makita lived, and just curious about more information about it. I'd like to get the book.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can you maybe give us a time frame, and then I'll tell you how you can get the book.
Sure. Bakita lived, we think she was born about 1869, and she died in 1947, and she had her conversion. She entered the church, let's see, remind me what year that was. I want to say in the early 1900s, because she spent a long, long time as a Canossian sister. I can't find the date. I'm sorry. But in any case, that gives you a sense of when she was living.
And Father Deacon Lawrence, the publisher is The Word Among Us Press, and the book is called Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. And so you can go to their website, The Word Among Us Press. Okay?
Very good. Thank you very much.
All right. God bless you. Thank you for that. It's fascinating to hear the story, too, because, you think Josephine Bakita's story is so extraordinary. Turn around in a Catholic church and you're going to find another extraordinary story.
Oh, sure. You'd think about Cardinal Pell.
That's a good point.
It's like,
yeah.
There are all kinds of examples of people who are suffering really grave injustice and managing it with such grace and freedom. This is one thing you notice about Bakita, is that she had been enslaved, but you would not meet a freer soul than Josephine Bakita.
Right. Liz, I want to get Judy on in Houston, Texas, because we're just getting very short of time. And Judy, go ahead real quick. You're going to have to be very quick with your question, Judy.
Yes. Hello. How are you? Thank you for taking my call. I'm very intrigued by your book, and I was just trying to find out if you could give some tips as to how you might start being a holier woman when you've got a full-time job and you're doing all these things all the time. What are some starting points?
Thank you, Judy.
Sure. Great question, and the book is really designed to be an engagement piece. So every chapter has questions for journaling and discussion. It also has prompts for prayer, for praying about that specific virtue. So it's filled with resources like that. There are several appendices that talk about how to pray for different virtues and things like that. So the book is really meant to be kind of a workbook So you're not just left with the stories, but you're really given some mechanisms to work on praying through and thinking about those virtues.
Judy, you caught us right at the end, but I'll give you the name of the book again and the publisher, and you can grab this beautiful new book from Elizabeth Kelly. Love Like a Saint, Cultivating Virtue with Holy Women. Love Like a Saint. It's from The Word Among Us Press. You can find it on their website, The Word Among Us Press. You could probably go to Liz's website too, lizk.org. Is that right? You can find out about it there?
Yep, that's right.
All right. Elizabeth Kelly, thank you again for another very, very fine hour, and congratulations on a beautiful book.
Thank you, Cy. Happy Easter.
Oh, happy Easter to you too. I hope we'll see you again very, very soon. Coming up, Carla Broussard, we're going to talk about the Bible blueprint for the papacy. And I'm trying to lay the groundwork for somebody to have a little bit of a challenging conversation with Carla. So if you don't believe that Bible blueprint's there, 888-318-7884. Right back. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Happy Easter. Hope it is a happy Easter. Hope you're having a good, happy Easter. If not yet, Easter Octave's not over. The season of Easter is not even close. It's hardly even started, so you got a lot of Easter left if you're still looking for that Easter joy. We're here to try to help and share it because, man, nothing better than Easter joy. The Lord being risen, our faith being vindicated, our faith in Him being vindicated, and we got a pretty clear message there in that resurrection of Jesus that we will rise with Him too, as long as we cling to Him in this life. We die with Him, we rise with Him. That's the promise, and we believe in that promise. This hour, we're going to talk a bit about the papacy. 888-318-7884 is the number. As a matter of fact, the Bible blueprint for the papacy, 888-318-7884. If you'd like to know a bit about the Bible blueprint for the papacy, your calls are very welcome. Our guest is Carlo Broussard, who's an apologist here at Catholic Answers, an extraordinary speaker and the author of 3 very fine books. I'm going to tell you the names of those books, and then I'll say hello to Carlo. He started with Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church. And then he was like, you know what? Let's meet some Protestant challenges. So he wrote a book called Meeting the Protestant Challenge, How to Answer 50 Biblical Objections to Catholic Belief. And his latest one, Purgatory is for Real, good news about the afterlife for those who aren't perfect yet. You know what? If I didn't know you and someone just gave me that, by the way, hello, Carlo.
Hello, Cy.
If someone just gave me this stack of books and said, what do you think of this guy? I'd say, that's a Catholic. There's no doubt there. That's a Catholic.
Yes, indeed. I will make one slight correction. So
what did I say?
One slight error when you were articulating the title, enunciating the title of Meeting the Protestant Challenge. How to answer 50 biblical objections to Catholic
beliefs.
Plural.
I apologize, Carla. Yes, right. And that's important because
I'm
you take
sorry. Pay attention to the details.
Who, if you don't pay attention to the details here in this building, who's going to do it, Carlo? You're very detail oriented. Again, 888-318-7884 is the number. And this is the way I think I'm going to describe the mind of Carlo, how you think about these things. And you tell me if I'm right. There is a certain blueprint for these things that we believe as Catholics, whether it's a blueprint for the church or a blueprint for the Eucharist, or in this case, a blueprint for the papacy.
Yes.
But then in a very respectful way, your next thing your mind does is say, yes, but there are Protestant counters to that blueprint. There's things that people that might look at that and go, well, what about this, Carlo? And so here's how your brain works. Here's the blueprint. Here's the counters. Here's the response to those counters. We might even call it the counter to those counters.
Indeed, yeah. And in fact, just a little...
I've gotten to know you.
Just a little sneak peek. That's coming down the pipe for the next book.
Counter the Counter is the next book.
Hint. Yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, so that's the idea. So we have certain arguments that we make as Catholics to try and justify our beliefs.
Sure.
But and often... I encounter this all the time. Our Catholic friends, Catholic brothers and sisters will say, why don't Protestants get it? These arguments are so persuasive.
It's so obvious. Why don't the Protestants get it? Yeah.
It's so clear, right? Well, Protestants have some good reasons to not buy the Catholic argument. You know, I mean, ultimately, I don't think they work, but they're reasonable.
Yeah.
In response to the Catholic arguments that from a Protestant's perspective, they could be justified in remaining Protestant in the face of these Catholic arguments because they have some ways in which they can counter and in their mind show that the Catholic arguments do not work. And so it's important for us to know what those Protestant counter arguments are to the arguments that we make for our beliefs, and then also know how to respond to those counter arguments. And so that's sort of the project that I'm currently working on for the next book project. And so I'm excited about it. And for our listeners out there, be on standby. More info to come.
Yeah. Our number here is 888-318-7884. You got to excuse me for a quick second, Carlo. I got to talk to Darren. Could we get an apologist who's meaner to Protestants next time? I'm tired of all this. We need a meaner apologist. Okay. All right. I'm back, Carlo. Okay. So, but the fair thing to do then is to say, well, give us the basic blueprint. What is the basic biblical blueprint for the papacy as we understand it?
Well, there are several passages that we could appeal to in order to construct or create this blueprint, right, for the papacy. But given that we're in the season of the resurrection, there is one event in post-resurrection in the post-resurrection phase, right, where we find Jesus giving Peter a certain leadership role in the Christian community, in the Church of God. And that's John chapter 21, verses 15 through 17. This is a common passage that Catholics throughout the centuries have appealed to biblically justify the claims of the papacy. The claim of the papacy being that the Bishop of Rome, as successor to St. Peter, is the keeper of the keys, the universal shepherd of the church, the supreme binder and looser, because those were the roles that Jesus gave Peter. And so in justifying Peter as the supreme leader of Jesus' church, that visible principle and source of unity for Christ's flock here on earth, and by way of extension, that applies to his successor in the bishopric of Rome, because Peter died as the Bishop of Rome. So John 21, 15 through 17, this is post-resurrection. Jesus is cooking up some fish on the seashore, recall.
Right.
And John recognizes it's the Lord when he's out on the boat with Peter. Peter, jumps in the water, swims to the shore, and we have that whole scene in John 21, and that sets up, and what's very interesting is that John tells us that the apostles had all of these fish that was requiring all of those in the boat to pull the net of fish to the shore.
Right.
But
153 of those.
153, that is correct. And then John tells us Peter went and grabbed them himself and pulled them to the shore, as if he was supernaturally empowered to bring the fish in the net to Jesus, which would represent us in the church. So that's an interesting nugget there that tees up what Jesus, the conversation between Jesus and St. Peter in John 21, 15 through 17. And that's when Jesus says, "Do you love me? Yes, Lord, you love me. Feed my lambs. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Tend my sheep." The Greek word there is literally shepherd my sheep. And then, of course, the third time, "Do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And Jesus responds, "Feed my sheep." So we have this threefold command from Jesus to Peter for Peter to engage in these shepherding duties.
Sure.
Feeding the lambs, shepherding, and feeding the sheep. And Christians throughout the centuries have seen in that one example among many of Christ investing Peter with this unique role to shepherd the universal flock of God. Because notice Jesus singles Peter out, gives him these commands in the presence of others, but does not give such commands to the other apostles who are present there, only to Peter. And also, too, Jesus entrusts all of his flock to Peter. It's not as if Peter is simply going to be the shepherd of this local flock over here or that local flock over there, but the entire flock of Christ, because he says, "Feed my lambs." In Greek there, it's lamb, suggesting the young, implying the young, and then shepherd and feed my sheep, implying the old. So both the young and the old, that is all the flock of Christ, is to be shepherded by this one shepherd, Peter, a universal shepherd of the flock of Christ on earth. And so that's one element of the biblical blueprint for the papacy. And then, of course, as you mentioned, our Protestant friends are going to make some counter arguments for that. So
no, because this is so obvious. Why don't they just get it?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that we as Catholics think that, because it implies as if, Protestants are just dumb and they don't get it or whatever.
Well, Jesus doesn't say, "I hereby make you Pope."
That's right. And that would be a false implication or a false assumption on the Catholic's part, because there are some reasonable counter arguments. Like, for example, a Protestant could simply respond and say, well, all Jesus is doing there is giving Peter the opportunity to make up for his thrice denial. You have a fire there on the seashore where this conversation, and then that calls to mind the charcoal fire where Peter denied our Lord 3 times. And we agree as Catholics, that is what Jesus is doing. Mm-hmm. But what we challenge and what we disagree on is that's only what Jesus is doing. And that's where there are some problems from in the Protestant counter argument. And so notice that if all Jesus were doing here is to give Peter an opportunity to make up for his thrice denial in abandoning Jesus? Well, he should have done it for all of the other apostles present there, because we're told at the Last Supper, not only did Jesus prophesy that Peter would fall away, but he also prophesied that all of them would fall away. In Matthew 26:31, we read, "You will all fall away because of me this night." And guess what happened? According to Matthew 26:56, Jesus' prophecy came to fruition. Quote, "Then, after his arrest, all the disciples deserted him and fled." So if all Jesus is doing here in John 21:15-17 is giving Peter the opportunity to make up for his denial and abandonment of Christ,
what happened to everybody else?
What about everybody else?
Yeah.
That he does not engage in that conversation with everybody else, giving them the opportunity to repent and to come and love him, implies that something unique is going on here with Peter, right?
Right.
And then another reason why this restrictive view is problematic is because such restoration doesn't necessarily involve the duties of a shepherd. Why is Christ associating the restoration with these duties to feed the young ones and to shepherd and feed the old ones? There's nothing in restoration that would entail these shepherding duties, right? If it were only restoration, then and restoration would entail these shepherding duties in a general way, then he would be saying the same thing to all the other apostles and bringing them in on the conversation.
Right.
But he doesn't. And so the singling out here within the context of giving the shepherding role to Peter, the singling out of Peter, it implies that Christ is investing Peter with this universal shepherding role, that there is a visible principle of unity for the flock of Christ on this earth. And that's the essence of what we say as Catholics the papacy is. And we see that in and with St. Peter in the first century.
Carlo Broussard is our guest. It's the Bible blueprint for the papacy this hour. You are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Whether you agree that blueprint is there or disagree, your call is very welcome here. 888-318-7884. Take a quick break. Be right back with your calls for Carlo.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connection's set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connection's website is homeschoolconnections.com.
When I was outside of the church, there was always an unsettled feeling. There was always a feeling of something missing and something not complete. The deal clincher is we found our way to our parish, and we met just an incredible pastor. We learned things that we'd never been taught. Wouldn't be the person that I am without the church and without the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist. I can't live without it.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church, visit CatholicsComeHome.org.
Welcome back. Happy Easter. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Carlo Broussard here in studio with me, and that's always a good thing. This time we're doing the Bible blueprint for the papacy. We're looking at the text of the Bible itself for our justification of the papacy. And if you have questions in that regard, whether you're Catholic or not, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. So Carlo has laid out the basic blueprint, and it's time for conversation. 888-318-7884. We'll start all the way up in Toronto, Canada. Watching on YouTube Live is Joachim. Joachim, are you there with us?
I am, yes.
Thank you.
So I'm Orthodox, and I'd like to understand how Catholics understand the papacy from the early church fathers, from Clement, from the early bishops, and the fact that there are multiple Petrine sees. How do you get to a universal jurisdiction and supreme authority?
Okay.
I just don't see that I just don't see how that works, given those things.
Okay.
All right, Joachim. My first thought is I would highly recommend the work of an apologist, Catholic apologist, Eric Ybarra. And that's, I think it's Ybarra.
I think that's right,
Eric Ybarra.
I'll look it up, but I think so.
He specializes in Catholic Orthodox dialogue in defending the papacy, both from a biblical and historical perspective. So I would highly recommend you look him up online and visit his website and some of the podcasts and YouTube. He has a YouTube channel with another individual, last name Leftow, I think, or I might be mistaken on that last name, but they have a YouTube channel. So here's basically what I would say in answering your question, Joachim, that the papacy, that the Pope has universal jurisdiction and a supreme authority over and above the bishops in union with him and over and above the flock of Christ here on earth is rooted in St. Peter. So that would be the first step that we would need to take and show that St. Peter had such a leadership role. Because if you deny that Peter had that leadership role, well, then we can't move forward. So let's just say Peter has that leadership role. And from that New Testament historical evidence that Peter was the supreme leader of the early church, we follow, the next step would be, okay, well, which see was Peter bishop of? Now, we know he was bishop of Antioch, and so that's a unique and a very prominent see, right? Because Peter was the see there, but Peter did not die as the bishop of Antioch. We could make the argument if he did die as the bishop of Antioch, well, then the successor to St. Peter in that see would be constituted as the pope. But because from historical evidence we know that Peter ended up in Rome, was the bishop of Rome, and we even have hints in Scripture from St. Paul's letter to the Romans that Peter had already founded the church in Rome, and that Peter dies as the bishop of Rome, what we see in the early Christian testimony is that the successors to Peter as the bishop of Rome took on the prerogatives that Peter had as being the universal shepherd of Christ's flock here on earth and being the supreme leader. So you mentioned Clement in passing. Clement sees himself as possessing some authority in his first letter to the Corinthians in the late first century. But not only does Clement see authority within himself to settle a dispute in the church of Corinth, what we find in the letter, Joachim, is that the church in Corinth, the Christians in Corinth, actually appeal to Clement in order to settle their dispute. Why didn't they appeal to John? Why didn't they appeal to an apostle who was most likely still alive at that time to settle their dispute, but yet they appeal to the Bishop of Rome? So we have Clement recognizing it, and then we also have other early Christian testimony and evidence. We have a hint in Ignatius in his letter to the Romans where he's talking about the Church of Rome presiding in love, which many scholars will interpret that to suggest or to mean as presiding over the community of love. So there's a hint there as early as AD 107. And then, in Irenaeus, Joachim, we have the writings of Irenaeus, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with in his book Against Heresies, where he's talking about the Church of Rome and how it's founded and built up by Peter and Paul. And Irenaeus talks about how all the churches throughout the earth must submit to the Church of Rome because there is the purity of the apostolic faith preserved. And of course, Irenaeus gives us a list of successors to the bishopric of Rome, 12 in number, from Peter to Eleutherius at his time. And then even among Eastern fathers, for example, Clement of Alexandria in the early 3rd century, he's referring to Peter as preeminent, right? Origen, he's not a church father, but a testimony of early Christian faith, and he's talking about Peter, identifying Peter as the one upon whom Christ built his church. And many of the early Christians, both East and West, would infer from that scriptural testimony that the successor to St. Peter in the bishopric of Rome had those same prerogatives that Christ invested to Peter, to guide, to govern, and to rule the church with universal jurisdiction in a supreme way, to be what I said earlier, that visible, principle, and source of unity. So I would recommend Eric Ibarra's work. And then also, too, Joachim, my colleague and good friend here at Catholic Answers, Tim Staples, has a great CD set where he goes into the historical evidence within early Christian testimony to bridge that gap, so to speak, between Peter and the Pope. And the title of that CD set is The Shocking Truth About the Pope, I think like in the early church fathers or something like that. So Tim Staples has a great CD set. And you might also want to check out Steve Ray's book, Upon This Rock. And Steve Ray, 3/4 of his book is looking at the early Christian testimony from both East and West in order to show the early Christians' view of Peter and his preeminence and his leadership in the early church, as well as the leadership role that his successors to the See of Rome had in subsequent years and throughout church history.
Joachim, thank you very, very much. That is a lot to digest. I looked it up. Eric Ibarra is E-R-I-C-K, and then his last name is Y-B-A-R-R-A, so you might take a look at that. And your call is always welcome here. You're always welcome to come back, but I'm going to leave it there because there are a bunch of folks on the line. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I am all lost and confused now. Why don't you say a number? What number should I?
Okay.
I'll push it on the phone. You tell me what number.
All right, number 5.
All right, number 5. It's like it's a game show now. Push it, number 5. Let's see who's there. Thank you very much for your call. That would be Joey in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, listening on the almighty 690 AM. Joey, go ahead with your question for Carlo.
Okay, hey, thanks. So one of the objections that I've heard is from Protestants is that the authority of Peter is one thing that is generally acknowledged, but, and this follows up on the other question, that his successors, the authority of his successors is what's questioned. And one of the objections that I've heard is that not all of the bishops of Rome, unlike Clement, not all the bishops of Rome have had their authority recognized, that they would make pronouncements, authoritative pronouncements on issues that would be largely ignored by the Christian community and the rest of the world. And so I was just wondering if you could comment on that and whether or not you think that undermines the claim. I'm a Catholic, so I certainly subscribe to the authority of the Holy Father, but I don't really know how to address that problem, if it is a problem.
Yeah, well, just because you have some disagreeing or dissenting from the Pope, it wouldn't follow from that the Bishop of Rome does not have the authority as the successor to St. Peter, because you're always going to have dissenting figures, right, whenever the Pope makes some sort of declaration. And given that assertion, we could simply respond with another assertion, Joey, and say, well, there is evidence that members of the church did agree, right, and did submit to his authority. And so this actually goes back to what I was saying earlier of what's more pressing is establishing the historical continuity between the authority that Peter had and the institutional office that Peter possessed as the universal shepherd of Christ's flock on this earth, as the keeper of the keys, and seeing the institutionality of his ministry as the rock of the church, as the visible foundation of the church, that principal source of unity. And once we establish the institutionality of his ministry, seeing from history that other men succeeded him, then it would follow from that those men would have that same authority. And then we look to that historical evidence where you do have the successors to St. Peter exercising that authority, and members of the church, both East and West, responding to and submitting to that authority. And you have the bishops of Rome settling heresies whenever heresies arose. And so you do have evidence of other Christians and Christians throughout the world submitting to the authority of the Bishop of Rome. And, earlier in the last call, I mentioned St. Irenaeus. And I think it's important that we point out for Irenaeus, once again, he says, when he talks about those who assemble in assemble in unauthorized meetings. And he says, we do this, I say, by indicating that tradition derived from the apostles of the very great, the very ancient, and universally known church founded and organized at Rome. So he's contrasting those who are assembling in unauthorized meetings who are not preserving the tradition from the apostles that's preserved and known in the church founded and organized at Rome. And then he goes on to say, for it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church on account of its preeminent authority, that is, the faithful everywhere. So there's a clear evidence in the late 2nd century of Irenaeus recognizing the supremacy of the Church of Rome, which would necessarily imply the Bishop of Rome as well.
Thanks, Joey, very much for the call. We're going to take a quick break. Right back with more Bible Blueprint for the Papacy with Karlo Broussard, 888-318-7884.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
According to divine command, we should give God worship, but how do we know if we're doing it right? Is worship a form of self-help to make me feel better, a form of social activism, or even a commodity? Or is it something that transcends all of those? In Real Religion, How to Avoid False Faith and Worship God in Spirit and Truth, Father Jeff Kirby cuts through the misguided modern notions about God and religion and takes you back to the foundation for true worship, God's revelation about himself. From his first contact with his chosen people to the culmination of his revelation in Jesus Christ, God shows us what religion is supposed to be like and how to make the practice of it a lifelong virtue in our lives. Order your copy of Real Religion by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Here's a question. Is it really possible to be friends with someone who died 2,000 years ago? Maybe the problem is that we've grown way too comfortable with the story of Jesus. Nice man, right? Taught us to love one another, said not to judge people. We celebrate his birthday every year. It's time to put away this small, safe version of Jesus, says Cy Kellett. Nobody that bland could have transformed the world. In A Teacher of Strange Things, Cy presents Jesus Christ undiluted by sentiment, with all his radical words and deeds uncensored. Do you know someone, your son or daughter perhaps, or maybe your mom or dad, who needs the friendship of Jesus Christ? Do you? Order your copy of A Teacher of Strange Things by visiting shop.catholic.com today or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
How we got our names can be fascinating to discuss.
We'll do just that tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now more of Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Karlo Broussard is our guest, and we're talking about the Bible blueprint for the papacy. Is it in there? Is there evidence that Jesus founded a church that has one vicar, one shepherd for all the sheep? Well, we think it is, and we welcome your call. If you'd like some help explaining it, maybe you're a Catholic person who'd like some help explaining it to someone. Maybe you're not a Catholic and you'd like to challenge us on the way we understand it. 888-318-7884 is the number, 888-318-7884. I want to say thanks to Bill in Virginia for a very nice call. Just kind of cheered me up, what Bill said. I can't share it. It's just that he just called and said something really nice. So I'm going to go to Hank in Bellevue, Kentucky, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Hank in Bellevue, Kentucky, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Karlo Broussard.
Okay, Karlo, I just love the papacy. When I was in the Marine Corps in 1970, we docked at Naples, Italy, and we took a bus trip to Rome. And that was during the papacy of Pope Paul VI, who wrote Humanae Vitae. And at the time, I didn't know about that encyclical. But after I found out about it, I didn't read the whole thing, but I know the gist of it. I absolutely fell in love with it because it's such a holy encyclical, and it's just God's love letter to mankind, in my opinion. That's just one of the things it is.
What a beautiful
thing to say.
thing
I just wanted to tell you that because, yeah, it's true.
Yeah, Hank, and you know what? Pope Paul VI needs his defenders too. I mean, he's a saint, and he has many detractors, and that's one of the most important documents in the modern history of the Catholic Church, without question. And what a beautiful testimony to him. Did you want to say anything, Hank?
Yeah, just the one thought that comes to mind is what this testifies to is the firm foundation that the papacy is when it comes to faith and morals, tying into the constant teaching of the Church, right? These things that are rooted in the natural moral law. Whenever the Church is explaining to us and articulating to us these principles of the natural moral law, we have the Holy Spirit guiding the Church. And in the face of extreme pressure to cave on this issue of how we are to use our human sexual powers, the Pope stays strong with the constant teaching of the Church and the tradition of the Church and says no to contraception, or teaching that contraception violates God's design for human sexuality. And that's a testimony to the gift that the papacy is for us, because I know from my own training and my own intellectual journey, it's difficult. It requires a lot of effort to reason through the philosophical background of Pope St. Paul VI's teaching in Humanae Vitae, and to understand why contraception is immoral and why it violates God's design for human sexuality. And most people just simply don't have the time or the skill sets or whatever to go through all of that philosophical reasoning, right? And so what is a person left with? Well, thanks be to God for a living testimony here on earth to speak on behalf of God, to guide and to lead the flock of God on this earth, to teach us the truth of the matter concerning our human sexuality and what's appropriate sexual behavior and inappropriate sexual behavior. Because there are many bright people who say, well, there's nothing wrong with contraception. You know, it's
many good people too.
That's right. Like good-intentioned people.
Right. Like when you think about what Paul VI did, there are great Thomistic scholars who, before Paul VI said, well, I think the Church is probably going to go this way. And they got it wrong. And to their credit, many followed along with the Pope. To the discredit of many others, they rejected what the Pope said, some of them bishops. But it really is a sign of the beauty and majesty of the papacy as a teaching office, that he got it right when there was so much temptation to get it wrong.
That is correct. And he didn't cave in, and he got it right, and he stayed strong. And thanks be to God for the papacy, as Hank said. So,
what do you think, Hank?
I say everything that Jesus just said. I celebrate it forever. And when God gives somebody divine authority to teach in His name, they have that authority from God Almighty Himself for that eternal gift.
Well, praise God, Hank.
Amen to that.
Praise God, and thanks. Thank you very, very much for the call, and thanks for your service in the Marine Corps.
Well, I was very privileged to see him with my own two eyes. You know, we were in St. Peter's Basilica, and he had the Mass.
That's beautiful.
Awesome.
That's just wonderful. The other thing people forget about. Thanks, Hank. And look at that. A Marine likes to know that somebody's in charge. Maybe that part's not surprising about that, but many people have forgotten this about Paul VI. He was the great traveling pope. Before John Paul decided to visit every single country on earth, Paul VI went to Israel, first pope to do that in, I don't know, at least 1,000 years. More than 1,000 years. First pope to come to the Americas, Paul VI, came to New York. So thanks for a little testimony there to Paul VI, right in the midst of our conversation about the Bible blueprint for the papacy. Certainly, these saint popes give us encouragement. But then on the other hand, there's these rotten popes where you go, maybe we're wrong about this. So that we got to be careful about that as evidence.
Oh, sure. Yes, because, yes, it is true that the holiness of the Pope does not determine the authenticity of his office. Okay, so that is true. And at the same time, if we're going to judge the legitimacy of the papacy based upon the lack of holiness of those who are popes, well, then we would have to reject the authority of the apostles because, as I mentioned earlier, they all abandoned Christ at some point initially in the garden, right?
Yeah.
And so we can't look to sinfulness of office holders as evidence or reasons to deny the legitimate authority that these office holders have. At the same time, it is important to appeal to the saintly individuals because those are the ones who testify to Jesus' way of life, that it actually leads to happiness and it works. If you live up to the teaching of Jesus, it is going to bear the good fruit that is manifest in the lives of those saintly members of the Christian community.
Thanks again, Hank. We're talking about the Bible blueprint for the papacy. You're welcome to call whether you believe in that blueprint or not, 888-318-7884. We go to Houston, Texas now, listening on Guadalupe Radio. James in Houston, thanks so much for your call, James. Go ahead with your question for Carlo.
Yeah, so y'all hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Just fine, thank you.
All right, good. Okay, so my question is, it's kind of a couple parts, but the first part of it is looking at the history of the church, okay? If that is the case of what y'all are saying, and I'm Protestant, so I'm coming at this from a different angle. I just, have the question, or always have had the question, and never really was able to ask somebody the answer. But if you look at what y'all are talking about with the papacy as far as the leadership of the church, it actually, from my understanding of church history, did not run that way for 1,000 years. I believe the Roman patriarch, the Roman Catholic patriarch, I don't know how you would term that, or phrase that, but was first among equals because of the size, but they actually ran the church for 1,000 years with the 5 patriarchs, started at 3 and then developed into 5. And then you get to 1052, the Great Schism,
right?
And I'm sure it started happening before then. But if you look at as that broke away, when you came with different things that the church hadn't really held as a doctrine before then, and correct me if I'm wrong, but things like the Immaculate Conception of Mary, the purgatory, infallibility of the Pope, all those things kind of branched off, and then you have this 500 years, and I don't mean to be disrespectful because I'm not trying to be. I
brother.
Just really trying to. Okay, so for 500 years, I think we saw what most people would say a very probably the most corrupt that they've seen the church as far as on the West, right? The 1000 to 1500 AD, where the Protestant movement came in, and then you had another schism, and now you got 40,000. I'm not proud of our, you know what I mean? I don't think that was the answer either. But so I guess just laying that out there like that, for 1,000 years it ran without one.
Okay.
Right? Without one.
All right. So
one voice. It ran with 5. Yeah.
All right. So that claim is that for the first 1,000 years there was no visible principle and source of unity for the church, that it was functioning with these 5 patriarchs and the 5 major sees having equal authority amongst them all. But that's simply not what the historical record shows. So as Catholics, James, we would simply just challenge that assumption. And there are many resources out there that do this. I mentioned one individual previously, Eric Ybarra, is doing some great work on this. Steve Ray has a book, Upon This Rock, where he goes into great detail in the historical record in showing that that was simply not the case, that the early church in the first, in the second, and in the third and the fourth centuries were looking to the Bishop of Rome as a principal source of unity. So I know I mentioned this already, but just to reiterate, you have Clement of Rome in the first century writing an authoritative letter to settle a dispute in the church in Corinth. The church in Corinth actually appealed to Rome, to the Church of Rome, to settle their dispute. So Ignatius of Antioch, early 2nd century, refers to the church in Rome as presiding in love. And as I mentioned, scholars articulate that and translate that as or interpret that to mean as presiding over the community of love. And even Ignatius has expresses a sort of hesitancy when he's writing to the Roman church in his letter. He says, I do not, as Peter and Paul, issue commandments unto you, right? And he commends this church because it has never envied anyone you have taught others. So even Ignatius seems to have a sort of due reverence for the Church of Rome. I already referenced Irenaeus, where he explicitly says, all the churches throughout the world need to obey and submit to the Church of Rome. And here's another interesting detail for you, James. It's interesting that in the mid-2nd century, you have an individual by the name of Dionysius of Corinth. He was the bishop of Corinth around AD 170. And apparently from the letter that he writes to the then reigning Bishop of Rome, Pope Soter of Rome, according to the letter, there was apparently some problems in the church in Corinth. Once again, go figure, more problems in the church in Corinth. And Dionysius, the Bishop of Corinth, is appealing to Pope Soter, the Bishop of Rome, to settle their disputes. And whenever you read the exchange between the two, you see this deference from the Bishop of Corinth, Dionysius of Corinth, to Pope Soter, and recognizing this sort of leadership role that the Bishop of Rome has. So those are just a few examples in the very beginning of the early Christian church, in the 1st and in the 2nd century, where you see this governing role that the Bishop of Rome sees in himself and others see in him in this unified way, that he is the principle of unity to settle disputes when they arise. And of course, the evidence just grows as you move forward in history, both east and west. And so we would just simply challenge that historical record and say, no, the historical record suggests that the Bishop of Rome did exercise this authority over and above other bishops throughout the world. And I might even add, the Council of Chalcedon, right, in AD 451 of the Tome of Leo, you had all of those bishops gathered at that ecumenical council waiting with eagerness for Leo's letter, his tome, to be read in order to settle the debate of that there are two natures in Christ, both human and divine. And so there you have testimony of the authority of the Bishop of Rome being recognized and settling yet again another theological dispute, which I would say maps on beautifully to what Peter was doing in the 1st century church at the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15.
James, we have to take a break, so I got to do that. I would like to take exception with one thing that Carlo did not take exception with, and that is that all the popes, or there was a terrible period of papal corruption between 1000 and 1500.
In my mind, I was trying to decide whether to go there or not, but I was leaving an opportunity.
Well, it's just a little bit of, there are corrupt popes, but there's Gregory VII and Innocent III and some of the greatest saints ever. We have St. Francis and St. Dominic being approved by Innocent III in that period. This is a high point, not a low point for the church in many ways. But I also want to offer James a book we have called Pope Peter, if you want to read that one.
I forgot about Heschmeyer's book.
Yeah, Joe
yes,
Heschmeyer.
Thank you for that.
Our friend and colleague Joe Heschmeyer wrote a book called Pope Peter, and we'll send it to you, James, if you want. And by the way, taking exception to what you said, in no way did I take offense. Right. Not at all.
Yeah, thank you.
You were very gracious.
We're grateful for James's good spirit.
But we got to take a break, or else I'm already in big trouble. Be right back with more of the Bible blueprint for the papacy.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
The blood of Jesus shed on the cross healed all our wounds. A lot of people say, well, I can do what I want. I can commit any sin. Jesus saved me. You can't be presumptuous. All holy God cannot allow you to sin or give you the right to sin by dying for you. That doesn't make any sense.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Carla Broussard is our guest. It's turned out we've done a lot of history questions, even though it's a Bible blueprint for the papacy. And I think just to get back to where we started was Carlo making the case that the Bible gives us a blueprint for the papacy and for a church, Christ Church, as a matter of fact, being led by the Pope, by this figure, this office of the papacy, and that we fully acknowledge that there are counter arguments against that, and so we encourage a conversation. It's been fine. We've done a lot of history that comes much after the Bible, but I do want to encourage people, if you want to know about the Bible blueprint or want to discuss what Jesus did in founding the church, and to our understanding, founding a church with a pope, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884.
We want to talk that Bible.
We want to talk about Bible. 888-318-7884. Let's go back to the phones. Let's go to Leo in Colorado, listening to EWTN on channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Lee? I'm sorry, I said Leo. I apologize because I had Pope Leo in my mind from the Middle Ages. Go ahead, Lee, with your question for Carlo.
Certainly. I want to thank that gentleman who was before me who asked questions, because he had a bunch of questions answered that were in my mind that I wasn't going to ask.
Oh, okay, great.
To the point, I understand that God appoints rulers over people, and that would include, I would assume, the Pope being the head of the church. And our current Pope, I have questions about a lot of statements that he supposedly has made.
Okay.
Some of the things sound almost globalist in nature rather than it's almost like he prefers a global world with no individual countries rather than sovereign nations, and other things that have sort of just made me feel not questioning where he really stands on
Sure.
these things.
Sure.
The question is, what are sources? There's so many different news outlets, so many different things, places that report on papal issues. What's one that is just like that you would say is like rock solid, reliable, and telling what actually happened? What he actually said?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because you give me the opportunity to say this. We have a wonderful Focus episode. As a matter of fact, the most popular episode of our podcast, Focus, Catholic Answers Focus, we ever did is an episode called What if Francis is a bad pope? What if Francis is a bad pope? And I think you should listen to it. I think you'll really enjoy it. We didn't pull punches. We hit pretty hard on that one. So that's with our friend Joe Heschmeyer. What if Francis is a bad pope? It's on Catholic Answers Focus. And just type Catholic Answers Focus into your machine and you'll come to it. The other thing I would say is I have been promoting a website that I think it's if you wanted a news website on Catholic news, and I love what they're doing over at The Pillar. You just go to pillarcatholic.com. That's our friend JD and Ed Condon. They're doing a great job over there. There's lots of good Catholic news out there. EWTN is doing magnificent stuff with Catholic News Service and the National Catholic Register. I was about to
mention that, yeah.
But give any of those a try, and I think that they'll be very helpful to you.
Yeah, I would also recommend our colleague and good friend Jimmy Akin. Very often whenever there's some sort of controversial statement made by Pope Francis, Jimmy Akin usually gives a really nice articulation and a clear walkthrough of what he said and how to possibly interpret it. If we were to give it a charitable reading, we should read it this way. And possibly this way. And so I would highly recommend you just always keep your eyes out for Jimmy Akin's work as well, Lee. But, I just want to affirm for you that it's legitimate to ask questions. Like you expressed several times that you have a lot of questions concerning what he said. And I just want to affirm that that's okay. It's okay to have questions concerning what Pope Francis is saying, because it is true that sometimes what he says can lead to misinterpretation and can give rise to confusion. Sometimes it's not as clear as we would like it to be, and he's not making the nuances that we would want him to make. And so it can lead to alternative interpretations that would seem, at face value, to contradict what the church teaches. And so it's okay to have questions about it. But as always, I would recommend that we always approach it with a spirit of charity and recognizing that the Pope is not infallible in everything he says. The gift of infallibility comes into play only when the Pope is binding the universal church to believe something that is definitive, that is true, that is unchanging. Outside of those boundaries, the Pope is not guaranteed to be free from error in what he teaches and what he says. So it's always important to realize that. But at the same time, I will say, it is also true, and I'm sure you would agree with me, Lee, perhaps, that many times when the Pope says something that some people say, well, the Pope is contradicting the church here, when you think about it more deeply, you come to realize, well, in reality, no, he's not, right? And so it's always important to take a step back whenever we're confused and to analyze it, to walk through it step by step, clearly and slowly. And then more often than not in his papacy, we come out on the other side saying, well, we might not think it's the best prudential decision that he made, but technically and doctrinally he's sound here. And so those are a few thoughts that I would have in how we can wade these waters and when we're confronted with some of the things Pope Francis says that may cause some question in our minds.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate that. Especially appreciate the chance to make a plug for our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus. Carlo, I'm not going to go to any more calls because there's not enough time, but I want you to address one thing.
Yeah.
You from when you talked about John's Gospel, the 21st chapter of John's Gospel, feed my lambs, my sheep, shepherd, all that. What about the objection that might say, well, okay, sure, Jesus is making Peter a shepherd there, but he makes other people shepherds in other places. So this is not a
big deal.
It's not an evidence for the papacy.
Yeah, and one passage many Protestants will appeal to is Acts chapter 20, verse 28, where it talks about presbyters who oversee their flock, right? So they are shepherds.
Right.
And so it would seem to take away from the shepherding role, or at least the significance of the shepherding role of Peter in John 21. But a couple of things come to mind in response is, number one, we can't forget the fact that Jesus singles Peter out in giving him these shepherding duties in the presence of the other apostles. It's very similar to what Jesus does in Luke 22, 29 through 32, where he says, Satan desires to sift all of you like wheat, but I pray for you, singular Peter, that your faith not fail, and whenever you converted, strengthen the brethren. And you can imagine the other apostles saying, hey, wait a minute, Jesus, throw that prayer over here, man.
Right? I've walked just as many miles as Peter has with you.
And so there you have Jesus singling Peter out.
Right.
Matthew 16, 18 through 19, Jesus once again singles Peter out, establishing him as the metaphorical rock upon which he's going to build his church, giving him the keys of the kingdom of heaven, telling him in an exclusive way to bind and loose, which is giving him an individual power, whereas he gives a corporate power to the apostles in Matthew 18:18 to bind and loose. Similarly, here in John 21, 15 through 17, Jesus singles Peter out, giving him these shepherding roles in a very unique way. And I might add what I said earlier in the broadcast, that Jesus entrusts all the flock, all of his flock, to Peter, both the young and the old. Feed my lambs, shepherd my sheep, feed my sheep. And that indicates there is a unique shepherding role that Christ is giving to Peter here, and that's to be the universal shepherd of his flock here on earth.
Did you time that answer to just end right when the music started? That was pretty good, Carlo.
God's grace, baby.
Oh, all right. Well, all right. Giving glory where glory is due.
Amen.
Well, thanks very much, Carlo. Thank
you
yesterday
for having
and
me, brother.
today. And
it was a lot of fun.
Happy Easter to you and your
Same
whole family.
to you.
Thank you. Tomorrow, 2 hours of open forum with the aforementioned Jimmy Akin. Is that correct? We got Jimmy for 2 hours tomorrow? Yes. Or were you on the air when you said that, or did you just say it? No, he just said it to me. Okay. Darren's running the board and doing a fine job. I still miss Nick, though. I don't know. I miss Nick. All right, we got to move on. Nick's gone. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here for 2 hours of open forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.